Hi all, welcome back to the channel, Thomas Classic and Modern. I'm Ross. Today we're going to be covering off the installation of our camshaft in the 1360 short motor build. We'll also be doing our oil pump installation and some clearance checking as we go along. So I'll get some bits and pieces together, get rigged up, and off we go. Okay, so first thing I'm going to cover off in this video is oil pumps. We have used the AC Dodge zero tolerance oil pump now for a number of years. If you have a look back to my videos, you'll see one of our engines having its oil pressure built with one of those pumps. That'll easily explain why we use those pumps. They are available from us if you need one. However, the first thing that you need to do with regards to oil pumps is check that your bolt length for the oil pump is correct. If it isn't, the oil pump will not seal on this mated face and you will have problems with oil pressure. So I'll just show you now exactly what we do in the first instance. Okay, so the first thing you need to do here is take your oil pump bolts. These have obviously been cleaned out. We have chased all the threads as we always do in any of these engine blocks. So these threads are clean and good, ready to take our oil pump bolts. First thing you do, wind your oil pump bolt in until it stops or meets some, heavy resistance, i.e. it's bottomed out. That is now fairly tight in there. Okay, so you just get both of those bolts, make sure that they are fully home. You're not dogging these up, you're literally just finger tight and you will feel them bottom out, which is about there. And there. So both of those bolts now are fully snug and home. What you now need to do is measure this gap between underneath of the bolt head and this mounting face. Easiest way I've got to do that is with a set of verniers, verniers, whichever you want to call them, and then work up to the bottom flange of that bolt to that mounting face, and that is 28.15 millimeters, so we'll call that 28 millimeters, and this one exactly the same. So 28 millimeters is our gap between there and there. What we now have to do is measure the thickness of that oil pump, which in this instance is 28.5 millimeters. So going by that measurement, we have 0.5 millimeters of compression or less of a gap between there and the thickness of that oil pump, which means that when we come to torque these bolts, that oil pump is going to pull in completely. If you had 29 millimeters here and that pump is only 28.5 millimeters thick, that would allow the oil pump to actually sit off that mating face, which means that the gasket between those faces, and notice I'm doing this without the gasket, so we actually have an extra little bit of pinch, if that makes sense. The gasket then would not seal fully. You would run into the risk of not having oil pressure or having oil pressure drain down issues, something along those lines. So that is the first thing that we do before we go any further. No issues at all with that. Those oil pump bolts are the correct length for this oil pump that we are fitting. So from there on in, we will move on to making sure that the camshaft fits in our newly installed camshaft bearings. Okay, so this is the camshaft that we're installing in this 1360 This is the AC.RS Plus ground on a brand new billet. You will notice that it comes in a heavy transit grease. All camshafts generally come in some sort of protective coating before you install them. It is absolutely essential that you clean that off. It's also a good opportunity if you're running a reground camshaft that you check the journals and check for any damage. Also check this thread on the end, make sure that that will take the camshaft retaining nut before you go any further. Also, some camshafts, cross-drilled billets, have a blanking plug in the end. If you buy a camshaft that has that blanking plug in the end and it's already fitted, my advice to you would be to remove it and clean the camshaft through thoroughly. Don't take for granted that that operation has been done successfully by the manufacturer. This one isn't, so we don't need to worry about that, but we will now move on to cleaning that thoroughly before we go fitting it up in the block itself. Also, some cam manufacturers actually supply the camshaft with the woodruff key not fitted, and if it's a cross-drilled billet, without that plug fitted. Again, that's your indication that that camshaft needs to be cleaned, and then you need to put a dab of Loctite on that that grub screw, the blanking screw, so to speak, and nip that up into place. Different camshaft manufacturers do things different ways, so just have a look at the installation instructions that should come with your camshaft. Okay, so we've now fully cleaned our camshaft. That's all ready to install, or certainly check that we have good clearance on these bearings and that there's no snags, no tight spots, etc. I have put the camshaft nut on the end just because I find it easier to have a bit of purchase as you're pushing the camshaft through. Point to note when you're installing the camshaft, these camshaft bearings are very, very soft. This camshaft is very, very hard. If you push this, meet any resistance as you're going through, you're not lined up correctly, you can damage, scratch, scrape these camshaft bearings. It does take a degree of care to do this, and you have to be very, very careful when you are doing it. This is our, if you like, our trial fit. So we have nothing in there at the moment at all. I don't actually even have any oil on these bearings. So we will just now make sure that this physically fits through nice and snugly and that we can turn it okay before we move to the next step. Some people do this with the engine tilted up on its end. You can do whichever way you feel more comfortable. I've always done it this way because you've got good vision and you can see exactly what you're doing. Okay, so obviously one end of the camshaft is larger than the other. It will only go in one way. Slotted end, in this case, to the oil pump end, which we just discussed. And then it's a case of nice and gently trying to avoid the cam bearings as you slide in with any of the cam lobes. Slow and steady. Then what I like to do is get so far and then get my hand through the other side, just pop a finger in the end of the slot just to help square it up. And that's it, that's all there is to it. No tight spots. That camshaft moves back and forth easily. Obviously it sits at a predetermined depth, which we'll cover a bit later on, but all the way through its range of motion through those journals, no tight spots, and that turns lovely. So I'm happy enough to say that we can now move on to the next stage, which is the actual installation of the oil pump, cam followers, and the camshaft itself. So we shall move on to that now. Okay, so here we have our oil pump now ready to install. We've already checked our clearance, as you just saw, so that's all absolutely fine. We now have our oil pump gasket. These are our gaskets that we had made. We did have some issues going back a long time ago with oil pump gaskets. We are currently having another version of these made slightly differently again. They will be available very shortly, but these are what we've been using now for a number of years. They're absolutely spot on. What I now do in the first instance is fill my oil pump with build lube. And again, in this instance, we are not 100% certain how long this engine is going to be stood before it's actually sort of completely built by the customer onto their gearbox. So giving this the best start that we possibly can. So, fill up the void there with your build lube, and then also the same on the other one. And just work that pump around so you know that that pump now has lubricant already in it and through it. This stuff, as I've said before, is like treacle, so it will actually stick in there and won't go anywhere. You then pop in place your oil pump gasket, just like so. Drop on the oil pump, making note of the orientation of the notch matches up to the bleed down hole just at the bottom. Flip that over, drop it in situ, and pop in your bolts. And then you can torque these bolts up to their required torque, which is 11 Newton meters. Nice and evenly. 1, 2. And that's it. Oil pump fully installed and torqued. Okay, so we're now going to move on to cleaning and installing our cam followers. These cam followers are supplied by Mini Spares. We actually then have them reground across the top by our good friend Keith at Carver ST. You can buy these cam followers direct from Keith, or you can actually send him your cam followers for resurfacing. These are actually generally very good, but we just have them checked and reset if needed. So to clean these, good old-fashioned brake cleaner, fill them up, wipe them down. That's all there is to it. These are solid, no oil drain hole. Some do, some don't, depending on which style you go for. We use these solid lifters. Quick squirt down over all of them. As you say, these have been reprofiled anyway. They've been through a cleaning process once. But as we've said before, you can never over-clean anything when it comes to engine building. And as you can see on the white cloth, no dirt whatsoever has come out of those. So just grab a clean cloth and wipe those down. That's those all wiped down. We'll then move on to lubricating them before we install them in the cam follower. Okay, so we now have our fully clean cam followers all lined up, ready to go. Again, build lube. So we put a smear on the side, work it around, and we also put a little bit on the face. Then how I like to install these is using a magnet. Nice clean magnet. Be careful with these, obviously they are magnetic. If you've got swarf around your workshop, etc, etc, it will pick it up. The last thing you want to do is go installing it in a new engine. So simple little magnet on the end, and then down into the cam follower bore, just like so. Use the magnet to locate it, and that's it. Exactly the same procedure for all the others, which I will do now. So that's the last one, all lubed up and ready to go into position. And that's it. That's all of our cam followers, all in place. You can see plenty of lubrication on them. And obviously, one thing I didn't mention is the flat side goes to the bottom of the engine for the camshaft to rotate on. The other side, the cup end, is obviously where your push rod goes. So they're all in situ. We'll now move on to installing the camshaft for the final time, and then we'll move on to the front end. Okay, so we're now going to install the camshaft. Before we finally install this camshaft, we now need to add whatever lubricant of choice on the cam lobes themselves. Some people use molly grease. I used to use molly grease myself, but I've now moved over to Joe Gibbs driven engine assembly grease. So the first thing that we need to do is get our cleaned camshaft and add this grease to the lobes themselves of the cam. And how I do it, I just go around a couple of the lobes, put in a decent squeeze of it on there, and then just spread that around with your finger. This is a much thicker version of the build lube, the Torco build lube. This is much more of a grease. And again, this is all about adding protection for the very first startup of the engine. The last thing you want is metal on metal surfaces rubbing together with no lubricant on them during that first startup. Just work that around all the lobes, covering them completely, so you know that there is no spot of that lobe or any of those lobes left uncovered. And that is that. You can also use this on the cam bearings themselves. However, with the cam bearings, I like to use just normal 2050 engine oil. So with those, just a squirt on the bearings, all three of them. Just work that around in there with your finger. Plenty of lube everywhere it's needed. You can also a little squirt on all of the journals. Doesn't need much on the actual journals themselves. And then we move on to the fitting. So this is exactly the same procedure as it was before, paying particular attention now to not catching those cam bearings on the way in with the camshaft. As you'll see, I've still got the nut on the end of this camshaft, And then once you get so far this time, and this bit is located, you now have to line it up with the oil pump the other end, which I do by just feeling around, and that's it. And that's that camshaft fully installed, fully lubricated, ready for the next stage in the build. Okay, I think we'll leave that there for now. Hope you enjoyed that video. Hope it gave you some insight into the care and attention that you really do need to take when you're doing things like this. We'll follow up this video now with the second part of this camshaft installation, which will be installing the timing cover backplate and the associated gaskets, fittings and so on. We'll also be setting the camshaft Endfloat. We'll be lining up your timing gears fully and correctly, and we'll then move on also to basic cam timing. So once again, hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe, and also let us know if there's anything else you would like to see us cover in some of these videos. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.